All right. Hello, everybody. This is Justice with Jack, Season 4, Episode 4. It is April 30th, 2026. And as usual, we are talking about the ACLU case, Armendariz versus City of Colorado Springs. And we are letting you know the time since the case has been filed. That is 1,004 days today, or 2 years and 9 months. And so we have a super badass guest. I really appreciate her community efforts. She is a person I have admired for her contributions for a long time now, and I'm grateful to call friend. So I'm going to ask my guest to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Deb Walker here today because I've served on the Law Enforcement Transparency and Advisory Commission that was just disbanded since the very beginning, most recently as chair.
Excellent. And you have some deep roots in this community. So I'll just add here, yes, we are talking about LETAC, and Deb has served in many other ways, but that's the hat that she is wearing today on Justice with Jax. And so it's been just a few days since our last recording, so really there aren't any new updates about the current state of the case. We still remain in wait mode, and we have some deadlines. Yes, with our legal system, hurry up and wait a lot of the time. So if listeners recall last time we shared that this May 27, the defendants in the case Armendariz versus City of Colorado Springs, which that is the City of Colorado Springs and the federal government, have the option to petition for rehearing. So that deadline is in May. And then another big deadline is June 10th. Which is for the petition for writ of certiorari, which would mean that the defendants are asking the Supreme Court to take a look at this case, which continues to blow my mind. And just as another friendly reminder, where we are with kind of the meat of the case is that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in February, which I'm just like, what are the days? What are the months? That feels like a billion years ago. But you'll remember that the ACLU stated that with this ruling, federal appeals court finds City of Colorado Springs and local police cannot avoid responsibility for unlawfully searched activists. So let's go. Here's my first question, Deb. As the final chair of the now defunct Law Enforcement Transparency and Advisory Commission, how would you summarize the conversation at the city level around this dissolution, especially if folks haven't been following what I would call as kind of sparse media coverage about it? And as Deb mentioned, I mean, this is years of work now. And again, I applaud you for your commitment to that, because police accountability, which we'll dig into that word more, really matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been on LETAC since the very beginning, which ended up being 5.5 years. I was the last original commissioner left on the commission and was in the chair position. And, you know, we'd struggled with effectiveness and really trying to figure out our role given, you know, the ordinance that we were working within for quite some time. And back in April, when Councilmember Yolanda Avila and Randy Helms, they both left Colorado Springs City Council.
They were termed out, both
They
of
were
them?
both, no, Randy elected to not
Run again. Gotcha.
run again, and Yolanda was termed out. So they were both of our liaisons for the last few years. And then Councilmember Roland Renée became our new council liaison. So we had some initial meetings with him, and you know, over the months, recent months, I should say, it just became more and more clear that we were all struggling, you know, with the role and This
is all volunteer. Let's be very
clear. This is all volunteer.
And it's a ton of time.
Let me say this. We were the only commission that I know of in existence that for the first, I don't even know how many years, but we were meeting twice a month. And in the very early days, we made a commitment to meet in the evenings because that's when community members who
working class folks can join in on the discussion.
Folks can join. And so it was 2 Monday evenings a month for a lot of years. Tough. And we would go long hours, like till 9 o'clock at night. So there was no shortage of commitment by commissioners. So we started, having these conversations with Councilmember Renée around perceptions about LETAC. And ultimately, I had a conversation with our vice chair, and we decided to see what it might look like to recommend disbanding. So we approached Councilmember Renée with that idea. He was very supportive, and it moved pretty quickly after that.
I noticed,
I think that also, the city on its own, they review boards and commissions regularly. And so I think there was some level of scrutiny that was existing in parallel. So it was easy. We all, for different reasons, I think we all agreed that this is not the right tool for the city at this time.
Understood.
So ultimately, so we brought it to the commission in late February, and early March voted on the recommendation, and it moved pretty quickly. So it took...
As a body, you all voted, and then it went to the city council for their vote.
Correct. And, it's a little bit distinct. So our recommendation had 3 components, and I'm just going to simplify it, but the first is to disband LETAC in its current form. The second was to do good research and to figure out what the appropriate model might be in Colorado Springs for accountability and transparency. And then the third is to implement that through new ordinance or whatever structure is appropriate.
Good to outline a process.
Yeah. So we made that recommendation, and then what has now happened is that City Council has moved forward with the first bullet point of our recommendation, which is to dissolve the commission.
Thank you for, adding the clarity to that. And can we get a shout out to your vice chair? Because that matters too. What is their name?
His name is Andrew Hoskins, and
gotcha.
Really smart guy.
Good. Yeah. I mean, it takes leadership, whether it's a volunteer commission or not, to, serve the public ultimately. That's what this is about, right?
And of course, we were having conversations with commissioners individually, taking their pulse.
How many commissioners were there?
Well, we're always supposed to have 11 plus a few alternates. One of the things that was interesting towards the end is that we had some vacancies, and the city really wasn't moving on filling those vacancies. So I want to say that we had 8 or 9 voting members at the end. I want to say 8.
Well, and contextually, I remember for the inception of the commission, quite a few applications.
There were more than 800 applications.
That's gotta be like a record, I feel like.
It must be, back in 2020. So there was all of this energy and excitement about what this might look like in the city. And to your point, there was like such waning interest at the end. And I think that really has to do with our efficacy as a commission.
Sure.
And, in the will of council in the city to help fill those vacancies. So there was a lot of churn over the years. I think people were frustrated because what they thought they were signing up for didn't necessarily align with the authority or lack thereof that we had.
Fair enough. And so I would say, I tried to look at a bit of the media coverage, which I don't know if you would agree, it was, like I said, kind of sparse. I found a KKTV article about the vote, and it happened this past Tuesday, actually, right? And so the headline said that, alleging that there'll be a replacement developed. We just, touched on this. And, in my observations, what I saw of the media coverage, I say that it looked like city officials kind of danced around what's coming next. And there aren't many details yet, except that the effort would be in control of the mayor's office. And, KKTV, they had video, but they didn't really have that in the text article. I like to read.
Here's what I know, and I can tell you. it does feel clear. I think they said it from the dais that this would now be in the hands of the mayor's office, which actually makes sense. I mean, I think part of the structural problem that we'd always faced is that we were appointed by and rolled up into Colorado Springs City Council.
Right.
And what council has authority over is the budget, functionally. Colorado Springs Police Department is under the mayor's authority.
Good point.
And so...
And he's the CEO of the city, right?
Right,
So,
right. And we didn't report directly to the mayor, nor did we really. I mean, he sent representatives to all of our meetings. So there was somebody in the room ostensibly reporting back to the mayor, but we didn't interact with him directly. So theoretically, if we had a recommendation around CSPD policy, we would recommend that to city council. If they chose to pass that along to the mayor, they could.
Feels a little bit like telephone.
So it's a few layers removed. So I actually believe that is one of the structural problems. So that city council wants to hand that over to the mayor's office, I think is appropriate in this case because he does have authority over the police department.
Point well taken. Yeah.
So they have said publicly that it's going to be in his hands. And then I can tell you, Councilmember Renée, also from the dais, emphasized.
We have his direct quote here in these notes.
Okay,
yes.
what is the direct quote?
No, this is what I appreciated. Yeah, the council member said, "This is not going to be just a drag out email. I want to see something on the calendar ASAP so we can move forward and reassure people that this is not going to drop through the cracks because as someone absolutely directly affected by the conduct of our police department here, I was immediately worried that that's exactly what was going to happen, that this is just going to drop through the cracks, go away. So, it's meaningful to hear him say that. And also, I have more things to say, but so do you.
But
please.
I will say that I can tell you that very day he followed up with an email to the chief of staff asking to do this, to set up a meeting. So Councilmember Renée has followed through on that. And so now it is in the mayor's office and we're waiting to try to get a meeting set up.
And here's the cue for all the people who listen to this show to make sure they are engaging with the mayor's office to let Mayor Yemi know that you care about police accountability with a big A underlined 3 times. And so I'd like to add, Deb, just for some color that this issue isn't going anywhere in this town because I do have to say, again, in looking at the coverage, I was also really concerned and disturbed to hear Councilmember Dave Donaldson say it's okay for them, and he was talking about the police, to shoot citizens sometimes, depending on that citizen's action. And, I can accept that maybe that's a better choice of words. I kind of get what you were trying to say there. But what I just want to point out is there are folks around the dialogue around police accountability where I feel they are missing that point about the human dignity of life. And dear Councilmember Donaldson, who is the only council member who has ever responded to my emails, just by the way.
He's very responsive.
Very responsive. I would ask him to edit and say, it is legal for police officers to use lethal force, right? And I think we have to do our diligence and not diminish the value of life, right? So to say it's okay for them to shoot citizens sometimes with a little qualifier there, depending on that person's action, really kind of bothered me. So I think we're not done with this conversation.
Well, and I think that this really underscores one of the troubles that LETAC had since the very beginning, right? I think we had all this optimism and hope that we would be a convener of these difficult conversations, and that would ultimately lead to a little more understanding and common ground. And that was really hard. And, we struggled the entire time.
I remember you guys, you really made an effort. And again, it's just, I think when you're trying to organize or do outreach, there are fundamental challenges that you face. And I remember, I think at first that LETAC, was setting up in the community, in community spaces. One of the prominent ones, I think you all even probably went to Chinook Center, which is my co-plaintiff in that case. In the case, that spoke volumes. Yeah. And so can you add a little bit around that? Sorry to interrupt you, but it sparked my memory that you were definitely doing the work as you could.
So community engagement in our desire and intent to have meaningful conversations was always at the center of not only what the ordinance asked of us, but, the commitment to folks around the table. I would say in the really early years, things were hard. It was COVID. We were established in 2020. And, I have these memories, Rachel Flick and I trying to do community, online town hall sort of things. And it was a struggle. And what we learned pretty quickly, because we were a little, naive and just doing our best.
We come in with the best intentions, right? And then you've learned.
We just wanted to listen and have hard conversations. But what we found out pretty quickly is that community members wanted answers that had to do with police policy and, in oftentimes specific cases. And LETAC was never the voice for, we did not speak for Colorado Springs Police Department, nor did we speak for Colorado Springs City Council. Right. So what we learned pretty quickly is that a lot of the questions, feedback, grievances, whatever, really didn't have much to do with our commission, right? Like that would have been better given to the appropriate bodies, and we'd be like, we don't speak for them. We can't answer that question. And that actually contributed to more frustration with community members. So that's what was the early years. And then really what we evolved, I would say, into is those who have big feelings or have been harmed by police.
Y'all can't see this, but I'm pointing at myself.
Have something to say. That's who came to our meetings and talked to us. And so then there was this interesting perception of that we only had one-sided community engagement. But the reality is I think for a lot of community members who maybe don't engage with police, they don't have much to say.
What would they say?
Things are going well for them. Yeah, so then that became a little bit of a structural challenge for us, is that we had many of the same voices and faces coming so committed, to every meeting, sharing very impassioned.
Kind of desperate for any avenue they could have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then we didn't have the authority to do anything about the things that they were bringing to us.
I did not envy that position.
Yeah, and we would listen. Yeah. And, I was always concerned that gave the appearance that we, could do something or that something would be done. So there were just some structural issues that we really were aware of for a while, which ultimately helped contribute to this decision to let the city know that, this maybe isn't the right tool. This definitely is not the right tool, and that we should figure out where people can safely bring their concerns and their feedback to an entity or a body that can actually engage with those issues.
Right. And that looks different. I mean, technically, which I, as a citizen here, have undergone this process, you can file a complaint with CSPD and then maybe you'll get an email back, right? So it's that is a different mechanism than what we're describing here. And there are choices around the mechanisms we use and the structures that they have. So story time, kids, we're going to dive into that structural part, because arguably I would say, Deb, and again, you're an OG on this, where I want to say very much, again, thank you for your service, your compassion, your empathy, because we've mentioned it on the show before. Yes, as activists, we went to LETAC to tell our story long before the ACLU case was filed. Though, frankly, we understood that LETAC was a mechanism with no actual police accountability power. And frankly, that argument came up before the inception of the commission. It had a controversial start. Here's a story time, in that, frankly, those of us who observed the process, we saw saw that really unknown organizers in the community were frankly duped into pushing a watered down oversight model in the heat, like you said, of what was Black Lives Matter summer, right? And so these young folks who identified themselves as members of a now defunct group called the People, which, what a choice in name, kind of a bit bold. They're no longer seen organizing in the community. And really what happened was that directly thwarted some already pending police accountability efforts proposed by another group of well-known, frankly, established community leaders. You can't see, but Deb, you're pointing to yourself, which is absolutely correct. I was going to say, such as yourself, who had spent time already. So please, you have years before LETAC working on this. You'd already spent time working on this after a certain conference, as I recall. And so for those of us watching, the inception of LETAC was actually really heartbreaking because we saw the full story in the midst of the chaos and the pain during Black Lives Matter summer. And so as time passed, LETAC eventually dropped the A that once stood for accountability, originally in its name, which was very telling for those of us paying attention. So what kind of context, what could you say as you were able, because it still is a sensitive matter, what could you say about this moment in time 6 years ago, and would love to hear about the work that you were doing prior?
I think this context is really important, actually, and it's been lost.
Girl, yes, that's why this
in the
podcast
history book
exists.
So back in 2019, I was then serving as the executive director of an organization called Citizens Project that advocates for equity and justice in this community and serves as a watchdog. And we had worked to put on a 2-day seminar called Undoing Racism. And we invited key community leaders to come and really do a deep dive into learning about systemic racism. And, so I had done all of that work. That was the summer of 2019. And
which is like a bookmark, right? Because, wow, the world flipped the next year.
Yeah. So it was interesting, actually. I was, I think, in a coffee shop, and we were doing a debriefing of the event, like what went well, what we could do differently. And the day before that, the very tragic news of the killing of Devon Bailey, he was killed the day before. So he was a teenager.
August 3, 2019.
That's correct. Yeah. And so we were sitting there having this meeting about, the event that we'd had, but also lamenting, like, wow, this
the
has
timing,
happened
no coincidence
in our community. Like, what do we do? And Reverend Promise Lee was one of the people who had attended the Undoing Racism event. And so we called him, like, hey, Promise, what can
our community is hurting.
Yeah, what can we do? How can we support whatever's happening? And Promise at the time said, well, the family's here, like in my church right now. You should come over here. And we did. We went over and we met the family, and really just that was the very beginning of engaging in this question of what could accountability and transparency work look like in Colorado Springs.
And let me put a point, if I may, briefly on why that is so poignant for Devon Bailey's story, because he was shot several times in the back, 7 times in the back, by a CSPD officer, and it inflamed the community. And there was an editorial board that was really standing up against the horrific smearing of this young man's reputation in the kind of mainstream media ecosystem that we've talked about on this show. If you're watching, it is skewed. And that is unfortunate. And so community members such as yourself gathered to push back on these narratives, and I think try to navigate in a way that was as healthy as possible for something that hurts so damn bad in the entire community.
Yeah. We wanted to be very thoughtful about it. And again, we were really just asking the question at that point, like what are other communities doing? What is working well? What are data informed outcomes? Like what are the experts saying in this space? And one of the outcomes of that is that a group of us, to include, to his great credit, then Councilmember Wayne Williams, he was part of this conversation with us. So it wasn't just a group of radical activists, right?
Sure, it was, in that case, it was bipartisan, actually.
Yeah. So we ended up going to a symposium in Austin, which gave us the name, the Austin Group, ultimately.
I remember that, which is kind of cool sounding, right?
Yeah,
Like,
we're the Austin Group. So we came back and we were still doing this work. And ultimately what happened is that we had a proposal that was before Colorado Springs City Council that would have really just condoned an effort to have an official body appointed to continue this question, to research the matter in an official way, and then to come back to City Council with a recommendation in maybe like 6 months or a year. So that had already had a first reading in front of City Council, and we were hopeful that City Council would appoint such a body, not necessarily us, to be clear, but we were like, can you take this seriously? Appoint some people and then listen to what they have to say after they study the issue, a blue ribbon panel, of sorts. So that was underway. And then George Floyd was killed. And
that's May 2020. That brings us.
It was May of 2020. So we'd had our sleeves rolled up for like 8 months, doing this work and this study and going to Austin. And at that point, the issue of police violence and accountability was a national
at the forefront.
Yeah. And all sorts of passionate people who probably didn't even know about the killing of Devon Bailey, if we're being honest, that this had happened in our very own community. They were protesting on...
We were all in the streets.
We were all in the streets, and it was the middle of COVID. I mean, things got really crazy. And to your point, this group of young people who we didn't know them, we didn't have relationships with them, like they were not part of the normal fabric of Colorado Springs. They put together pretty quickly this ordinance, and at some point we were actually engaged with them, and we explained to them the work that we had been doing and said, please don't derail what has been really serious and good work up until now. Like maybe we can work together and be more powerful together. And they decided that they
would take the meeting with the mayor and get the front page stories.
Yeah. So ultimately, that's the ordinance that passed. The feedback that I got privately from members of City Council basically was that, there wasn't an appetite for waiting. So ironically, the plan that we were proposing was much more slow and deliberate and thoughtful. And people wanted action immediately. And so that's what City Council did, was they passed the ordinance that then established LETAC. At that moment in time, most of my colleagues wanted nothing to do with it. They anticipated that it would just be, window dressing or lipstick or whatever you want to call it. And they walked away. I don't know what's up with me, but I am always of the belief that, I like to stay engaged in conversations and be at the table. And so
I admire that.
I mean, it's an approach. So ultimately I did apply to be on LETAC, even though it was absolutely not the model that I was advocating for.
You had invested already 8 months in building a legitimate research background around, right? And I will tell you, I mean, and there's one, I feel a kinship with that, because when we recognize systems, are not ideal, it doesn't necessarily mean that you turn your back, right? You stay engaged. You do what you can.
You do what you can within the systems. Yes. And I believe that in my core. And so I was one of those 800 and however many applicants. And I was selected.
And look, here's the OG at the end, the final one standing. I mean,
this is now like 6 years of my life.
I know.
So
and
it's a little surreal.
Isn't it, though?
It's pretty surreal.
It is. And I will tell you, and I think it might have been like the very first episode of this show, which I was like, wait, has it been 2 years already? It's going. But I will tell you, those of us watching, I reached out to one of the people. And for those of us watching, it was especially shitty because it was a situation where this group of young folks, awesome, be involved, be a strong voice, hell yes. And also maybe check the ego a little bit because it turned into this, what I would call a pushback between like the Austin Commission and, forgive me, using my words here as best I can, but it was like, hey, old people, you can't tell us the people what to do. Like, we're the young people here and we know what we want. And when I really got into it with this, or asked more questions, I would say it was not adversarial, but I was approaching as a concerned community member, being like, hey man, do you really know like what you're doing here? And I asked about the origins of this ordinance, right? Because the people put together an ordinance very quickly, right? Which, as young folks that had not been involved in these processes at all, it's like, well, where'd you get that from? And this person admitted to me that this new organizer who had just like moved here from Florida, I think he said, wasn't really known in the community, had started working with them and just kind of presented this to them. And they thought, yeah, let's go with it, right? Because, again, my observations here, they were getting a lot of attention in this moment that really mattered as young Black and brown people. Yeah. And
there was a lot of affirmation from city council, from
mayor especially.
The mayor's office.
Yeah.
And there were members of the Austin group that had really spoken out vocally. I mean, these were sort of tried and true activists who spoke their mind.
Yes.
And what I will say is that one of the key learnings that we had when we went to Austin, as it related to oversight versus like advisory models, is there was a data point that was presented that oftentimes advisory commissions can, in the end, cause more harm than good because it gives the appearance that there is something, which I think ultimately there was a lot of wisdom in that. And here we are. But that was what gave us the most pause when we saw that original draft of the ordinance. Was like, this like
is directly
we've learned that maybe nothing is better than
potential harm.
Yeah. So and again, I was like, okay, well, let's see what good we can do.
You locked in
within the constraints, but there was concern by the folks that I was working with.
Well, and sometimes we we all wear different hats on this show. Sometimes we put on a tinfoil hat a little bit and then we take it off. But putting my tinfoil hat on, look, it is not an unknown practice for dark money forces to parachute folks into certain communities to thwart political practices and ongoing. So come at me, put it in the comments. But if you have any details about this, my honest theory is that this organizer, who I never met, who I don't even know if they're in the community. I had a name. I wanted to know, right? Daniel, allegedly. I personally think that it is possible they were a dark money plant that was put in this conservative community to actually thwart any progress on this issue at a very key moment in time, which is so sad. and yet I have to honor that, like, my gut is really, as we've discussed here, question how that all played out, right? And it's really weird to me and striking to me, notable, I appreciate you mentioning it, is like, This is so interesting that, one of the main criticisms of bureaucracy or government is like, y'all move too damn slow. But in this particular moment, as you mentioned,
very quickly
moved hella fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't necessarily ascribe to
that is my opinion.
To that theory.
No tin
but
hat.
It just from a, like, I have a master's degree in public administration. But like, yeah, hastily made policy is usually not good public policy.
Well said. Yes.
And so,
which there's a tension between those, right? Like, of course you want to be responsive.
Nobody wants to wait 2 years,
and
right?
Also, do it well.
Yeah. So I think there's some. It's a good case study, right? For somebody to study.
Well, I would love. I mean, if you can tap in, it's been a few years now, but. What were some of your other takeaways as the Austin group? Because that was some of my frustrations, knowing like, no, there's this group of people who I trust and respect. We don't even have to agree all the time, but I see them putting in the work, and that was usurped. But if you could share a little bit more.
I mean, ironically, we never got there, right? It's almost like we identified the problem statement and we were lining out how to get to a solution before everything got upended. So we didn't have a recommendation. I still don't have a recommendation. What I would really like to see is the city put some good thought into really researching, like, what are other communities doing? I mean, there's so many different models that are working. And, everybody in Colorado Springs likes to say, we're not Denver. And like, nobody's...
Oh, don't you dare.
Nobody's saying that, right? Like, there are conservative communities that have implemented oversight models that are working for them. And so I maintain that the thing that we need to do moving forward is to go out into the world, see what's working, what's not, and then, craft a customized solution for Colorado Springs that acknowledges our political landscape and acknowledges our population and their interests. So I don't have the answer. I just want to be really thoughtful about how we get there.
Imagine that. Thoughtfulness, mindfulness, intentional.
Which is nearly exactly what we were asking for, 5.5 years ago.
Yeah.
But I get it. I mean, there were like thousands of people showing up to these protests. I mean, the energy was real. And so, I have a large degree of understanding about how this happened. But it was fast and quick, and, the protests ended, which was arguably, a pretty big motivation. So, yeah.
Here we are. And may I ask, I mean, I think you could take a beat on this, is something you mentioned, the difference between, it kind of speaks for itself, but I'd love to hear it in your words, is advisory versus oversight. What can you say about that?
Well, it looks different in lots of communities, so there's no like one size thing. But generally speaking, right, advisory commissions serve in the function that we did, which is that we can, make decisions and then make recommendations to whatever body, whether that be city council or mayor's office. And it's simply that. It's a like, hey, we've learned this and we have a recommendation, and they can do with it what they will. Communities that have oversight bodies, and again, it can look lots of different ways, but typically some sort of authority is vested with an oversight board. Maybe that means that they have special access to information about use of case or use of force cases, or other sensitive material. We did not as LETAC, right? So when we had community members coming to us saying like, this harm was done to me, or I need somebody to look into this. We had no special
way to do that, no mechanism to do
for
that.
inquiry, or no special insight into police data even. So an oversight board might have information like that. They might have the ability to investigate officers. So there's lots of different ways that can be set up, but they have power to do something or have access to information that might inform their ability to make a recommendation. or
you.
to affect change, I should say.
Appreciate that. And one thing too, I mean, we're talking about how LETAC has dissolved, but that is not to say I also want to recognize there are key recommendations that were made. There was work that was done. So if you want toot the horn a bit, even so, because that should be included as part of this conversation as well, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So we found ourselves, after we realized
It's an awkward position.
We weren't the accountability commission, but we were the advisory commission. I do think there was some good work that came out of the commission over the years. One of the main things that I think we served in the function of is really just being a body that people could come and speak to, and that then their voices were heard, and that existed on the record in some form, right?
A space.
It was a space, because really the only other space is Colorado Springs City Council to publicly speak one's piece. So we provided that at every meeting through a community member comment period, and then we also held a few times a year, usually a listening session for community members to come and help us understand what we, should be putting our energy into. So I think that is good. The trouble with that is that we really, at the end of the day, didn't have any, power or authority to do anything with that information. So if somebody, had concerns about a use of force case, or that their rights had been violated by CSPD, I mean, we literally had no ability to do anything with that. Our charge was really to make larger recommendations having to do maybe with budget or policy, but not to investigate specific cases. But I'm proud that we were able to create that container for people to be heard. So one of our earliest recommendations was to create some resources for what ultimately was the alternative response team. So the city has what they call CRTs and ARTs. The crisis response teams have a law enforcement officer, typically like a paramedic, medical provider, and then a mental health provider. And so they're charged with going out to cases where somebody's in mental health crisis. So there's those resources. And then the fire department has teams that they call alternative response teams that don't have the police officer. It's just the medical and the mental health professional. So the city ultimately, I think it was around $500,000 a year, allocated some resources to increase the ART, the alternative response teams.
And that was based on LETAC's recommendation.
That was absolutely based on LETAC's recommendation, which is good because we want police resources
I'll take it.
going to where they're, most appropriate. And, people who are in mental health crisis, unless there are safety issues, really should be cared for by mental health professionals.
Truly, I think wherever you are on the political spectrum, most people can say, no, police shouldn't be in situations where they're dealing with mental health crisis.
Yeah. So that was one of our earliest and most notable accomplishments. But then also, we made a recommendation at some point about First Amendment rights in this tension of, protesters being arrested. And we made some recommendations around clarifying in the city's webpage and literature, like what the expectations and rights are of community members who want to exercise their First Amendment rights. So that way people wouldn't get caught off guard when they were, say, hypothetically arrested or, ticketed for exercising those rights. So encouraging the city to be a little more clear about what is protected and what is not protected. And I think they've implemented some of that. I don't know exactly how much, but that was a recommendation. There was also a recommendation that we made that had to do with hands-on training to help reduce use of force with a weapon. So, like things like that, like more time needs to go into, giving officers the opportunity to feel comfortable, with martial arts. So they're not using their weapons as much. So those were some of the lesser known recommendations that came out. We also, the police department on its own commissioned a couple studies.
We remember this because they did a whole show around it. I mean, to those of us watching, we're like, okay.
Yeah.
One of the venues was like a theater.
Stargazers. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's what I'm remembering. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's why I say show. I mean, it was a theater. So yeah.
Yeah. So the commission reviewed those pretty thoroughly. And then there were recommendations that came out of both of those documents. Those can be found on CSPD's website, incidentally, if anybody wants to view the many hundreds of pages. Right. And again, I give credit to CSPD for commissioning those on their own. And then we ultimately affirmed the recommendations that, these outside objective professionals provided. Like, do the things.
Right. Because I remember, I mean, again, if you're a watchdog of sorts, right? Interestingly, it was like an outside firm getting a healthy contract to conduct. Did it include a survey? If I remember something around a survey. Okay,
I don't recall.
And so we've been watching, right? Because we're here for police accountability, and that kind of leads me. I feel like you have mentioned it a bit. We talked about it at the top, where now this rests in the mayor's office. And so, again, here's the plug to be an engaged citizen and, send the mayor a note that you're watching, because police accountability matters. But with that said, we talked about Councilmember Renée, his commitment, his follow through. This matters because in the years since, there have still been people who have been shot and killed by CSPD. And that deserves oversight. One of my, I feel one of the great tensions of this is, police are not infallible. So what is the pushback against some sort of oversight, right? That being said, I went on the city's website to see what was going on. And I was a little bit concerned because I would kind of call this the antithesis of what the council member said, in that, I tried to go to the LETAC page and it just says access denied. I understand it's been dissolved. However, for someone like me, I'm like, yikes, that's almost like it never existed. That's a little troubling. And if you do a keyword search, none of the LETAC work or who were members really pops up. It's just one-off mentions, and I'll include a link in the description. But there's a city podcast episode about it with a former council member. So, I mean, do you think it would make sense to preserve the work of LETAC on the city's website? Even if it did end up dissolving, so maybe if some people are listening, we can get that back on the website.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from this experiment. And again, I don't think I'll quote my former commissioner, Rachel Flick. And afterwards we were talking and she said, nothing's wasted.
Right.
This hasn't been a waste.
Remind people who Rachel Flick is, because that is really relevant to her being a part of the commission.
Yeah. Rachel was one of the best surprises for me of the commission. We became good friends, but she is a law enforcement widow. And so a lot of people were questioning her ability to be objective, when the appointments were made. And she ended up being one of the most, valuable members of the commission in terms of her open mind and her open heart and her real desire to find common ground and understanding. She was great. She was the chair before I was. And really, I mean, I talk about how I'm the last one standing, but Rachel and then JJ Frazier,
shout out to JJ.
Shout out to JJ.
Cool.
She's
Super
amazing.
Cool,
she was our first chair.
Right.
And so, she was the first, I was the last, Rachel was, in between.
Women, hold up the sky.
Yeah, I mean, there were some men in there too that were chairs, but but they only left the commission in September of 2025. So I wrote out the last.
They put in the work.
I wrote out the last 7 months as the sole survivor, but they put in 5 years.
Let's recognize that.
5
Absolutely.
years of really good work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot to deconstruct around appointments and voices, but I think Rachel's such an amazing example of, despite what could be unbelievable bias, she came at this work with a real open heart and mind, and is such a great example of finding common ground. I mean, we challenge each other all the time, as friends. She'll call me and say, "What do you think about this?"
I mean, isn't that what friends do?
It totally is. It totally is. So I am so grateful for that friendship. But also I love to just get and eat a little crow myself. I mean, I was one where I was like,
no one's
how
infallible.
in the world can this woman that I don't know, but I know her story, right? That she's been so harmed, right? Like personally, by violence against police. Like, how could she possibly do this work objectively? So those were some, it was, I think there's a lot of treasures that do come out. But to your original question, it would be to everyone's disservice,
if we just forgot about
we
this,
just forgot and we didn't
long-term test.
take good lessons learned. Yeah. So I've been in conversation with some former LETAC members that are also like public policy nerds to try to compile on our own.
There is overlap.
To try to compile on our own a document that might record the history, but also provide some analysis.
That's awesome.
Whether that lives on the city's website, moving forward, I don't know, but it's certainly our intention to document the work that was done, and hopefully that is utilized moving forward.
Yeah.
One of the things that is going to be really hard for this city to contend with, and I don't know the answer, but there's a large group of people who are absolutely clear and strident that oversight is required. Right?
I'm raising my hand, y'all.
and then there is a large group of people who think, leave them alone, let them do their jobs.
Hard.
So threading that needle is, that's the task at hand, right?
Yes.
To figure out what is their middle ground that might be acceptable for
this community. Specific. It's not a cookie cutter type of thing. Given the,
like where would the compromise live on your side? Where would the compromise live for people who are, big defenders of law enforcement, no matter what? Those are the tough conversations that this community needs to engage in. And that's what I hope to see moving forward.
As do I.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In the elephant in the room, right, is I will give, Colorado Springs Police Department, it is shocking the number of outreach programs that they do, right, in the name of community engagement. And they do a lot of work in that area. Like they're handing balls out to,
some of us call
kids.
It propaganda. There are some criticisms around it.
They do a lot of it. But I guess my point is that doesn't include the oversight conversation, right? So that's the elephant that needs to be dealt with is can we do oversight? What version of that might that look like in this city? Is it possible?
Right. Because it's easy to engage with community when it's very positive and you're like, here's footballs for the kids. It's a different element when you are coming face to face with someone like me who is saying and has a case that could, I hope not, honestly, go to the Supreme Court, that my rights were violated, right? That's a completely different dynamic and vibe in terms of conversation.
Right. And those can both be legitimate, perhaps.
They can both exist, right?
Right. But we can't do one without acknowledging the realities of the other.
I appreciate that. Very much so. Yeah.
It's not just about, the warm fuzzy stuff. And I love the warm fuzzy stuff.
We all do.
I'm glad they're doing that. It's really important work
I like
that they are engaged in.
Getting sports exposure and hopefully feeling safe and seen in my community. Yeah.
But the other exists also.
And also we can't ignore that there are tough conversations.
There are tough conversations. And those were the conversations that community members would bring to LETAC, and that we were really, not equipped to answer
did not
or
afford
handle.
It. Right. Yeah. And so I will just remark, in what I remember, LETAC commissioners were kind in hearing our story, and yet it was like awkward because both of us were like, look, we know you're just listening, so thanks. And so I think this is the part of the podcast where we try to add a little balance, because we can do both. We can talk about the hard things because we want to make progress, and we want to be a collectively happy and healthy community living with one another where we are not pitted against our neighbors, right? And I think Deb and I are trying to contribute that. I'll speak for myself, I guess. But this is where we add a little balance and say, like, what's good in your life? Do you have some calls to action? Whatever you want to name in that balance of, we kind of practice like an attitude of gratitude here.
Okay.
What's good in the hood?
Okay. It's not in my hood.
Okay, that's okay. This general hood.
But not even in the general hood. But one of my favorite things that brings me joy in life and gratitude is that I try to do like one a year, serve as an international election observer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really meaningful work. And
You're right. It's not in the...
It's not in this hood.
The global hood.
It's the global... We are
global
all humans. So I was recently in Hungary for the election. And, as an observer, you're totally neutral. You're just observing what you're seeing and then reporting back, and then big reports happen.
What agency are you reporting back to, or how does that?
It's the OSCE, which is the Operation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and it's a big international entity that does.
I love your nerdy brain.
One of the many things they do is support democracy in the world.
We like that.
We
support democracy on this show.
We like that.
Yes.
So as an observer, you're totally neutral. But what I will say for anybody following the Hungarian election is that the people turned out. Wildly, they turned out.
Very important global moment, really.
It was a really important global moment. Yeah. And that to me was just a reminder that democracy can work.
It lives. She lives.
Yeah, it can work. And the people's voices are strong and powerful if they turn out and unite. And it was such a powerful moment. And I was so grateful to just be a witness to it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I had a front row seat. But it's easy to get disillusioned and
be a little bit cynical, right?
Yeah. But I was like, wow, Hungary, look at you. You turned out with their votes.
Because they had like 80%?
I want to say
higher.
It was 70 something.
Okay.
But huge though, right? I mean, if we had turnout numbers like that in the United States, it would be huge. And then that they had 2/3 of parliament,
Yes.
The opposition party won.
And because I'm not a neutral observer, I'm going to say extremely consequential for those maybe very reasonable international politics, not always on your radar, but it was the defeat of Viktor Orban, who just days before, I think, maybe the day before, had relied on the support of J.D. Vance coming in from our country to Hungary to give him support. And so for people who listen to the show are aligned probably with my politics, what a delightful thing to just see a authoritarian get just absolutely bitch slapped by his countrymen and women and people. So I think that is some good news for the world, and definitely well done way to share.
And the democracy worked. I mean, that's what really heartened me was like, wow, the system worked. The people,
I love that.
The people spoke.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
Hope is the thing with feathers. I refer to myself as a relentless millennial optimist. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Deb. I knew this would be an absolutely delightful and very thoughtful and smart conversation. So I appreciate you deeply. All right, so episodes of Justice with Jax are recorded as a member of the Studio 809 Podcast Collective at the Nexus Community Co-working Space in downtown Colorado Springs. Remember to ask yourself 2 questions. Who's telling your story? And how are you being the change you want to see in the world today? This is Justice with Jax, signing off.